My parents called me. The family disappointment for years until I proved them wrong when the truth about my success hit them all at once. I'm Craig, 29 years old. The family disappointment. That's not an exaggeration. It's what my dad actually called me one Thanksgiving right after asking me to pass the gravy. He said it like it was a joke, but the smirk on his face told me it wasn't. My mom laughed along, my brother grinned, and I sat there pretending it didn't sting. I've been pretending for a long time. In my family, success had a very specific shape. My dad ran a financial firm. My mom was the kind of woman who judged people by the car they drove. And my older brother Jason was the golden boy who fit their mold perfectly. He got the $100,000 car for his 21st birthday. A glossy white BMW that my dad surprised him with in the driveway while I filmed the whole thing because, Craig, you're good with phones. I was 19, working 2 part-time jobs and driving a dented Civic with 1 working window. When I congratulated Jason, he threw his arm around me and said, "Don't worry, little bro. Maybe one day you'll get there." He meant it kindly, I think, but it still landed like a slap. Jason got everything. A fully paid condo downtown, a cushy job at dad's firm right after college, a $5,000 watch for graduation. Me, I didn't even get invited to the dinner they threw for him. Mom said it was more of a business networking thing and that I probably wouldn't fit in. That was the story of my life. Never fitting in, always standing just outside the frame. What made it worse was how subtle the digs became as I got older. When I dropped out of college to start my own business, they called it a phase. When that business failed, Dad sent me an article titled, "Why Most Startups Collapse Within 2 Years" with the caption, "Interesting read." Mom told people I was still figuring things out, which was her polite way of saying unemployed. At family gatherings, Jason would make these little comments like, "Hey Craig, how's that next big idea coming along?" followed by his girlfriend's giggle and a pitying glance from Mom. I learned to laugh it off because arguing never helped. It only confirmed their version of me. Bitter, sensitive, unsuccessful. Still, I kept trying quietly while Jason posted photos from corporate retreats in Hawaii. I was coding in my apartment at 2 a.m. when Dad called to tell me I should come work for him for a few years and learn something real. I politely declined. He said, "Suit yourself," and hung up. I could hear the disappointment in his voice. Not even anger, just that quiet, condescending pity that hurt more than yelling ever could. The turning point started a few months before the Thanksgiving dinner that would change everything. I had been working on a small tech platform. Nothing fancy at first, just a tool to automate customer data for local businesses. It grew faster than I expected. Suddenly, investors were calling. I didn't tell my family, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I knew exactly how it would go. They'd either mock it or worse, act supportive while waiting for it to fail. I wanted to build something on my own terms, something real without the constant shadow of my dad's firm or Jason's perfect resume hovering over me. By that point, I had stopped showing up for most family events. The few I did attend were more out of guilt than desire. But that year, Mom insisted I come home for Thanksgiving. "It's been too long." She said, "Your brother's bringing his new girlfriend and everyone's excited to see you." The way she said, everyone sounded rehearsed. I almost said no, but a small part of me, the part that still hoped maybe they'd finally treat me like more than a disappointment, said yes. The dinner was held at a country club because, of course, it was the kind of place where the napkins were folded like swans and the waiters wore white gloves. I arrived early wearing the only blazer I owned, a little wrinkled from sitting in my car. When I walked in, I saw my family already seated at a long table. Jason waved, grinning. "Look who decided to show up. The prodigal son returns." Everyone laughed. I smiled and sat down. I told myself I wouldn't let it get to me. Not tonight. But it didn't take long for the old routine to start. Dad asking Jason about quarterly performance. Mom complimenting his girlfriend's elegant taste. Then a casual, "So Craig, what are you doing these days?" I kept it simple. "Still working on a few tech projects?" Dad raised an eyebrow. "Tech projects?" he repeated like it was a foreign word. "So no real job yet?" Jason laughed softly. "Hey, he's an entrepreneur, Dad. That's what they call it now when you don't have a paycheck." Everyone chuckled. I felt the old burn in my chest, but I forced a smile. "Something like that," I said. Mom patted my hand gently like she was comforting a child. "We're proud of you for trying, dear. Not everyone's meant to take the easy route." The dinner went on full of little jabs disguised as humor. When the wine started flowing, the comments got looser. Jason told a story about how Dad had taught him everything about business and how some people just aren't wired for success. Then came the toast, the moment that stuck in my mind long after that night. Jason stood glass raised high, his voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Here's to family," he said. And to my brother Craig, maybe someday you'll catch up. Laughter rippled around the table. My hand tightened around my glass, but I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, at all of them, and smiled. A real smile this time, though they didn't know why. Because 15 minutes later, as dessert was being served, the giant TV above the bar flickered. The sports channel cut to breaking news. Local business headlines. Tech startup acquired for $40 million, the anchor said. Founded by local man Craig Lawson. I didn't even hear the rest. The room seemed to slow down. My dad froze mid-sip. My mom's smile faltered. Jason turned toward the screen, his face draining of color. Then he looked back at me, his voice barely above a whisper. Wait, that's your company. And that was the moment everything shifted. Not just in the room, but in my life. But before I could answer, before I could even process the expression on his face, Dad's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up, glanced at the screen, and his expression turned unreadable. That was when I knew something bigger was coming. The silence after that headline was the kind that fills every inch of a room and still manages to press against your ribs. Jason's hand hovered midair, holding his wine glass like he'd forgotten what it was for. My mom blinked at the TV, her jaw tight, and my dad's phone buzzed again, this time louder, vibrating against the tablecloth. I just sat there staring at my untouched dessert, pretending to read the little chocolate tag that said, Happy Thanksgiving from Stoneburg Country Club. Dad was the first to speak. Well, he said, clearing his throat, his voice stiff. I suppose that explains why you've been so busy. He laughed, but it sounded dry like a bark that didn't belong to him. Mom finally found her voice. Craig, why didn't you tell us? Her tone wasn't proud or amazed. It was sharp, almost accusing. Do you know how embarrassing it is to find out from a television? I shrugged lightly. You never asked. Jason's girlfriend Emma blinked between us. Wait, she said, pointing at the TV that was still looping the headline. You're that Craig Lawson, the one who founded Circuit. I nodded once. Jason still hadn't said anything. He was staring at me like he just realized I was speaking an entirely new language. You built that, he finally muttered. I thought you were still, freelancing or something. Yeah, I said, keeping my tone calm. It started small, took a few years, but it worked out. Dad leaned back, his eyes narrow. Worked out, he repeated, almost mocking. So you made a deal behind our backs and didn't think your family deserved to know. That stung. It wasn't behind anyone's back, I said. I just didn't think it mattered to you. You've all made it pretty clear on the black sheep. Mom gasped quietly, hand to her chest. Oh, don't be dramatic, Craig. You've always taken things so personally. Jason finally found his footing. This is unreal, he said, shaking his head with a small laugh. So what now, huh? You're the big shot. You going to rub it in our faces? I looked at him, at that smug half-smile, trying to mask whatever panic was bubbling underneath. No, I said. I was just here for dinner. But even as I said it, I could feel the room shift again. People at nearby tables were whispering. Someone even clapped me on the shoulder, congratulating me. Jason's expression hardened. Dad didn't like attention that wasn't directed at him, and Jason had inherited that same fragile pride. After that, the night became something else entirely. The table split into two worlds. Mom, Dad, and Jason on one side, tight-lipped and cold. Me on the other, trying to disappear into the linen napkin. They didn't even finish dessert. Dad signaled for the check early, muttering something about needing to discuss things privately. When we stepped outside, the chill hit like a wall. Dad turned to me by the valet stand. We'll talk tomorrow, he said firmly. At my office, tin sharp, I nodded, though I had no idea why I was agreeing. Jason just scoffed. Can't wait to see how this goes, he muttered before getting into his car. That was the last thing anyone said to me that night. The next morning, I woke up to 23 missed calls, 12 from Dad, 8 from Mom, 3 from Jason. My phone buzzed again before I could even process it. Dad, I answered. Where are you? His voice was clipped. Home, I said. You told me 10, it's 9:30. Come now, we need to clear the air. When I arrived at the office, his assistant looked at me like I was a stranger trespassing. She handed me a visitor badge, something she'd never given Jason in his life, and directed me to the conference room. Dad was already inside, seated at the head of the table, papers spread in front of him. Sit, he said. I sat. He leaned back, studying me for a long moment. You blindsided us, Craig. You realize that, don't you? I didn't think I owed anyone an announcement, I said carefully. His jaw twitched. You're still part of this family. Whether you like it or not, what you do reflects on us. People are calling clients, colleagues, friends asking why we didn't mention we had a son in tech. Do you know how that makes me look? That word look summed him up perfectly. My father cared more about appearances than truth, always had. I didn't build the company for appearances. I said, it's not about you. His eyes went cold. Everything you do is about me. You carry my name, my reputation. You wouldn't even have the brains for that company if I hadn't paid for your education. I bit back a response. I'd paid my student loans myself after dropping out. He'd cut me off the second I left college, but arguing that now would just prove his point. In his mind, I was still the ungrateful kid. He slid a folder across the table. I spoke to some people, he said. We could bring you under the firm's umbrella, merge your work with ours. It would make sense. We can position it as a family success story. I stared at the folder. You want to take credit? I said flatly. He frowned. Don't be childish. It's business. You could use guidance managing that kind of money. Let us help. By us, he meant him. I stood slowly. Thanks, but I'm good on my own. His voice sharpened. Don't be foolish, Craig. I can help you avoid the kind of mistakes you're known for. I froze. Mistakes. He sighed like he pitied me. Your track record isn't exactly spotless. You've had failures. You lack discipline. Jason's got the right mindset. He could be a real asset to your company. There it was, the pitch. You want Jason involved, I said. I want this family united, he corrected, which meant the same thing. I left before I said something I'd regret. That night, Mom called. Her voice was sugar over vinegar. Honey, your father just wants what's best. He's worried you're in over your head. I'm fine, Mom. I know, sweetie, but 40 million is a lot to handle. Maybe talk to Jason. He's got experience with these things. I laughed quietly. You mean Dad handles everything for him? She sighed. Craig, you always assumed the worst. But I wasn't assuming. I'd lived it. Every time Jason stumbled, Dad cleaned it up. When Jason lost $60,000 in bad investments, Dad called it a learning opportunity. When I missed one rent payment years ago, Dad called it proof you're not responsible. For the next week, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Jason sent me a long text about joining forces and doing something big together. I ignored it. Then came the dinner invite from Mom just to talk things through. Against my better judgment, I went. Dinner was at their house. The same one filled with pictures of Jason's graduation, Jason's awards, Jason shaking hands with Dad's business partners. There was exactly one photo of me shoved on a side table, half cropped out of a family shot. Jason greeted me with a wide smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hey man, look at you, Mr. Big Deal. He clapped my shoulder a little too hard. Hey, I said, sitting down. Dad didn't waste time. Your brother's got a proposal, he said. Jason leaned forward. So here's the idea. You've got the tech. I've got the connections. We can scale this thing tenfold. I bring in clients, investors, infrastructure. You handle the product. Equal partners. I blinked. Equal. He nodded. Earnestly. 50-50. Dad nodded approvingly like it was already decided. It's a win-win. You get stability. He gets exposure. Everyone benefits. I stared at both of them. You realize my company was just acquired? There's no partnership to offer. Jason smirked. Come on, man. Don't play coy. You'll start another one, right? You've got talent and we can back you this time properly. Mom placed her hand on mine. Craig, think about it. Family should help each other. I looked at their faces, hopeful, expectant, greedy. It wasn't about family. It was about control. They couldn't stand that I'd done something without them. I stood. Thanks for dinner, I said. Mom's smile faltered. Craig. I'm glad you're proud, I said, but I don't need managing partners or mentors or help. Dad's voice hardened. You're making a mistake. Maybe I said, grabbing my coat. But it'll be my mistake. I left before they could stop me. That should have been the end of it, but of course it wasn't. Over the next few days, Dad started calling people he knew in tech and finance circles, checking in, offering advice, clarifying details. It didn't take long before a few of my old contacts told me he'd been introducing himself as a key backer of my company. When I confronted him, he brushed it off. I'm just helping establish credibility, he said. Then Jason posted on LinkedIn a long, self-congratulatory post about learning from family success stories. It included a picture of us at Thanksgiving and a caption that read, proud of my brother for carrying the loss in name into tech innovation. Excited for what's next together. We weren't working together, not even close. But he was already telling people we were. That's when I realized they weren't just trying to share the spotlight. They were trying to take it. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. But before I could act, something happened that changed everything. Something that showed me just how far they were willing to go to drag me back under their control. The betrayal didn't come as a sudden explosion. It came like a slow leak, quiet at first, almost invisible. But by the time I noticed, the damage was already spreading. It started with an email I wasn't supposed to see. I was sitting in a small cafe downtown, laptop, open headphones on, working through a round of post-acquisition logistics for my company, when I got a message from my bank. At first, I thought it was a standard verification alert, but then I saw the subject line: request for account authorization pending approval. The request came from Lawson Financial Group, my father's firm. They'd submitted a request to gain temporary financial oversight on my business accounts under the pretense of family trust management. It was flagged as suspicious because obviously I hadn't authorized anything. I froze. My coffee went cold while I reread the message 5 times, hoping I was misunderstanding it. I wasn't. The document attached even had my father's digital signature and a note that said Craig Lawson Beneficiary Oversight under Family Fiduciary Authority. Beneficiary. The word made my stomach turn. They were trying to legally classify my company earnings under the Lawson Family Trust, the one I'd been excluded from years ago. It wasn't just overreach. It was a full-on attempt to seize control. I called my father immediately. He picked up on the second ring, his tone as calm as ever. Craig, good timing. I was about to call you. What is this? I asked, my voice shaking. You try to access my business accounts. He sighed like I was overreacting. You're misinterpreting things. It's a standard oversight process. We're trying to help you manage your assets responsibly. I didn't ask for help, Craig, he said sharply. $40 million isn't a toy. You're young, impulsive, and inexperienced. If you make one bad investment, it all disappears. We're just protecting what's ours. What's yours? I repeated slowly. He hesitated for just half a second, enough to tell me he knew what he'd said. You're part of this family, he said finally. That means you represent the loss and legacy. The company's success reflects on us. It doesn't belong to you, I said. You wouldn't even be here without us. That was it. I hung up before I said something that would burn every bridge left. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, weird things started happening. My accountant called confused, asking why there were duplicate inquiries on my tax documents. My lawyer mentioned that someone had tried to request information about my non-disclosure agreements from the acquisition firm. Someone else, anonymous, had even contacted one of the venture capital groups I'd worked with, asking if I'd ever mishandled funds. The pattern was obvious. My father and brother were trying to dig their way in through back channels, probably hoping to find something they could use as leverage. It all came to a head a week later when I got invited to what I thought was a networking brunch at a hotel downtown. The email looked legitimate, signed by one of Dad's old business acquaintances, a man named Richard Bennett. I almost declined, but curiosity got the better of me. I should have trusted my gut. When I arrived, I spotted them immediately. Dad, Mom, Jason, and Richard all seated at a private table in the corner. The moment I saw my father's expression, that smug half-smile, I knew I'd walked into a setup. Craig, Dad said, standing to greet me like this was some family reunion. Glad you could make it. What's going on? I asked, scanning their faces. Sit down, son, he said. We need to clear the air. Richard smiled politely, but he looked uncomfortable. Jason leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking. Mom reached for my hand. Please, Craig, just listen. Dad started with a speech that sounded rehearsed. We all made mistakes in how this was handled, but we have an opportunity to set things right, to work as a family. Richard here has been advising us on how to structure a joint trust. You'd maintain control over your company earnings, of course, but under family oversight. It's cleaner that way. I felt my pulse spike. You mean you'd control it? Dad shook his head, smiling thinly. Not control, guide. You'd still be the face of it. Jason would just manage the financial aspects. He's good at that. Jason grinned. It's just numbers, bro. You focus on the tech. I'll handle the boring stuff. I looked at Richard, and you're helping them with this. He shifted uncomfortably. Your father presented it as a family consensus. I assumed you were aware. My voice dropped. I wasn't. Dad's tone hardened. Don't be naive, Craig. You're in over your head. You don't understand how these things work. Mom chimed in softly. Honey, your father's just trying to protect you. You've always been so independent, but independence doesn't mean isolation. Jason chuckled under his breath. Yeah, man. Don't make this harder than it has to be. That's when something in me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly enough that I felt it in my bones. I stood up slowly. You really think you can just take what I built because it makes you uncomfortable that it's mine? Dad's face tightened. Watch your tone. No, I said, finally meeting his eyes. For once, you watch yours. The air went heavy. Mom looked like she might cry. Jason rolled his eyes. I'm not signing anything, I said. And if you try to touch my accounts again, I'll make it public. Dad scoffed. Don't threaten me, boy. You wouldn't dare embarrass this family. Maybe you're right, I said. Maybe I won't have to. I left. But even as I walked out, I could feel Jason's glare on my back like a warning. That night, the real betrayal hit. I was at home half asleep when my phone exploded with notifications. Dozens of messages, emails, and calls. My business Slack was going crazy. A client had posted on social media tagging me directly, disappointed to learn about the internal misconduct at Circuit. Hope this isn't true, Craig. My stomach dropped. I opened my laptop and saw it. A leaked document thread online supposedly exposing how I'd falsified company data before the acquisition. The files were doctored, but they looked real. Internal memos, spreadsheets, even fake email chains. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. My phone buzzed again. It was my head of operations, Maya, calling in a panic. Craig, what's going on? Investors are asking for statements. I don't know. I said already, pulling up the documents, but someone's trying to take us down. Within an hour, I traced the first leak to an IP address, one linked to Lawson Financial Group. I sat there in my dark apartment, staring at the glow of the screen, feeling the kind of cold that comes from betrayal you can't quite process yet. My own family had sabotaged me. Not just embarrassed me, tried to destroy everything I built. I confronted them the next morning, walked straight into my father's office without knocking. He didn't even look surprised. You went too far, I said. He looked up from his desk, unbothered. Careful what you accuse people of. You leak fake documents. You tried to ruin me. I protected our name, he said flatly. People talk, Craig. They ask questions. You're not prepared for that kind of scrutiny. I simply redirected the narrative. Jason leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Relax, man. No one believes that stuff. Then why do it? I demanded. He smirked. Because you needed a reminder. You don't get to cut us out. Not after everything we've done for you. Everything they'd done for me. The irony burned. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just looked at both of them and said, You've made a mistake you can't undo. Dad's eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? No, I said, my voice calm. It's a promise. I walked out without another word, but later that week something else happened. Something that made my father's betrayal look almost small in comparison. A letter arrived at my door. No name, no return address. Inside was a printed email thread between Jason and one of my acquisition partners. The message was short but devastating. Hey, appreciate your time earlier. Just to confirm, the offer still stands. We'd be willing to negotiate directly if Craig steps back. Family would make a much better public face for Circuit. We can handle the optics quietly. It was signed, Jason Lawson. That was the moment the last bit of doubt left me. They weren't just trying to share my success, they wanted to take it, and if they thought I'd just let that happen, they hadn't learned a thing about me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The letter sat on my desk like a quiet confession. Those printed words burned into my brain. Family would make a much better public face for Circuit. Jason's name at the bottom looked almost smug on the page, as if he'd signed it with pride. I must have reread it 50 times, each time feeling another part of me crack. My brother, the same brother I'd once shared bunk beds with. The same brother who'd promised when we were kids that we'd always have each other's backs. He'd sold me out not for survival, not even for necessity, but for the spotlight. By morning, my phone was a battlefield. Investors were jittery, partners were confused, and the acquisition team had suspended all press communications until they resolved internal inconsistencies. I was suddenly radioactive. The story my father's firm had helped circulate, that I'd fake data, had spread further than I realized. Even though it was false, the doubt was enough to make people hesitate. And that's all it takes in business. One pause, one whisper, one rumor. Maya called again around noon. Her voice was shaky but calm. Craig, I just came from a meeting with the PR firm. They said your father's office called them offering to handle crisis management for Circuit Tech under the family name. I laughed, but it came out hollow. Of course they did. She hesitated. Are you okay? I stared at the wall. Not really. After we hung up, I just sat there, blinds half closed, sunlight cutting across my desk, my laptop humming quietly. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than shouting. I'd built my company from nothing, fought through years of failure, loneliness, doubt, but I'd never expected the final blow to come from my own blood. Over the next week, things spiraled faster. My acquisition deal was put on temporary review. Some investors pulled out, clients began pausing projects. The media had latched onto the drama like vultures. Headlines read, "Family feud at the heart of $40 million tech deal." And Lawson Dynasty rift spills into business world. Every time I opened my phone, I saw Jason's face smiling and photos being quoted as a close family advisor. He was giving interviews, spinning a version of events that made me look reckless and impulsive. "Craig's brilliant," he'd say, "but creative minds sometimes need grounding. We're just trying to guide him." He was painting me as a genius in need of supervision, not independent, but unstable. Mom called every night, alternating between guilt and manipulation. "Honey, please just talk to your brother. He didn't mean to hurt you. He forged my name on documents." "Mom, your father said it was just a misunderstanding. You know how paperwork can get. Paperwork doesn't send fake emails to investors," I said quietly. She sighed, her tone softening. "You've always been so sensitive. This isn't worth losing your family over." But that was the thing. I hadn't lost my family. They'd lost me. Then came the lowest blow. I was walking to my car one evening after a long day of damage control when I noticed a reporter waiting by the curb. He looked nervous, almost sympathetic. "Mr. Lawson," he said, holding out his phone like it might bite him. "Off the record, you should know your brother's firm is preparing a statement, something about reclaiming oversight of your assets due to mental health concerns." I froze. "What did you just say?" He swallowed. "They're implying you're not fit to manage your company post-sale, that the stress has caused instability." For a second, I thought he was joking, but his expression was dead serious. By the time I got home, it was already out. The statement wasn't directly from my family. It was anonymous sources close to Lawson Financial Group, but it was clear who had written it. It claimed that I had been under significant strain, that my erratic decisions had raised questions about my capacity to manage long-term business affairs. It was calculated, designed not to destroy me outright, but to make people second guess as me. That's worse. The next day, the acquisition company froze the final payment transfer pending an independent review. I suddenly had millions locked behind bureaucracy and no access to most of it. The irony, the only people I could technically appeal through the chain of authority were part of the same old boys network my father ran. Jason even had the nerve to call me. "Hey man," he said casually as if nothing had happened. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You should have just worked with us. None of this would have happened. You forged my name, spread lies, and now you're questioning my sanity," I said quietly. "You think this is just business?" He sighed. "You always make things emotional. Look, Dad's right. You need structure. You're not built for this kind of pressure." Something inside me cracked then, but not in the way they wanted. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, "Thanks for the clarity," and hung up. That was the moment I hit rock bottom. Not because I'd lost money or status, but because I finally accepted that there was nothing left to save between us. The illusion of family was dead. I disappeared for a while after that. Stopped answering calls, stopped showing up to meetings. I rented a small cabin 2 hours outside the city. No Wi-Fi, no reporters, no noise. Just me, my laptop, and the weight of everything I'd built slipping through my fingers. The first few days were numb. I'd wake up late, stare at the ceiling, make coffee, and sit on the porch, watching the same pair of birds hop along the fence. There was something calming about the stillness, even if it felt undeserved. But beneath that quiet, something else was forming. Not anger, not revenge yet, but focus. The kind that comes when there's nothing left to lose. I started piecing things together, mapping out every move my father and Jason had made, who they contacted, what strings they'd pulled, where the fake documents had originated. I still had connections in tech and cybersecurity, people who owed me favors. I reached out quietly under the radar. One night, while going through encrypted email logs, I found something, a clue I hadn't noticed before. The forged oversight documents that had been submitted to the bank, they hadn't come directly from Lawson Financial Group servers. They'd been routed through a smaller shell company recently incorporated under a different name. The owner, a consultant, who'd once worked for my father's firm. I sat back in my chair, the pieces clicking into place. They'd built a front, a legal buffer to distance themselves from what they were doing, and they thought I'd never find it. The next morning, I drove back into the city. My first stop was my lawyer's office. He'd been handling my side quietly, but even he looked uneasy. Craig, he said, I need to be honest with you. Your father's influence is substantial. If we push too hard publicly, this could get ugly fast. I'm not scared of ugly, I said. I just want the truth. He nodded slowly. Then you'll need proof. Real proof. I'll get it. Over the next few weeks, I worked in silence. No social media, no public statements. I let them think they'd broken me. Meanwhile, I was collecting digital fingerprints, tracing money transfers, building a trail of evidence so clean it could cut glass. But it wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about reclaiming my name, my autonomy, my dignity. One night, I was in that same cabin surrounded by printouts when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You shouldn't have gone digging, Craig. Some things are better left buried. No signature, but I didn't need one. I looked at the screen for a long time, then turned it off and set it face down on the table. For the first time in months, I felt something sharp in my chest. Not fear, but resolve. Because now it wasn't just business. It was war. And the people who had once called me the family disappointment had no idea how much damage disappointment could do once it stopped caring about their approval. It's funny how rock bottom sharpens you when you've lost everything. Reputation, trust, family. What's left is clarity. Cold, ruthless clarity. I didn't rush my comeback. I wanted it to burn slow, quiet, deliberate. The way a fuse crawls before it reaches the dynamite. The first thing I did was rebuild my footing. I didn't try to fight the headlines or argue online. I'd learned something from watching my father operate. People forget noise but remember proof, so I started with what I could control. I called Maya. She sounded hesitant at first, probably wondering if I was about to announce I was quitting. Craig, it's been weeks. How are you? I'm fine, I said, though that was a stretch. Listen, I need your help with something. Off the record, there was a pause. Then I'm listening. Over the next hour, I laid everything out. The fake financial oversight request, the shell company tied to my father, the leaked emails, Jason's attempt to negotiate behind my back. I didn't tell her about the anonymous text. Not yet. Maya was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that stuck with me. They made one mistake. What's that? They underestimated you. That single line flipped a switch in me. We started small, reclaiming control over what they'd taken. Maya reached out to key clients one by one under the radar, assuring them the allegations were being investigated. I hired an independent auditor to verify every shred of Circuit's financial history. Within a week, the auditor's report came back. Everything was clean, no data manipulation, no fraud, nothing but excellence. That gave us leverage. Not enough to restore the acquisition yet, but enough to plant doubt about my father's concerns. Next, I met with an old friend, Tomas, a cybersecurity expert I'd helped years ago when his startup almost collapsed. He owed me one. When I told him about the forged documents and the shell company, he grinned. You want me to find who really did it? I want you to make it undeniable. For 2 weeks, Thomas dug into digital mod. Every night, he'd send me updates, IP traces, VPN logs, server timestamps, the works. It was a ghost hunt until one night he called me. Excitement in his voice. Got something, you're going to like this. He'd traced the origin of the forged documents to a laptop registered under Lawson & Financial's network, specifically Jason's credentials. But here's where it got interesting. The files were uploaded from a remote connection during business hours when Jason was supposedly off-site meeting clients. Meaning he tried to cover his tracks by bouncing through the firm's proxy, but Tomas had pieced it back together. It was enough not to take them down yet, but enough to start planning how. Meanwhile, something else started to happen. The narrative began shifting. A tech journalist who'd covered my acquisition months earlier reached out privately. I've heard whispers about what your family's been doing. If you're ready to talk, I'll listen. I didn't respond right away. Timing mattered. I wanted all the dominoes in place first. Then came the call I'd been waiting for from the acquisition company's legal division. Mr. Lawson, the attorney, said the review is complete. Your name has been cleared. We'll proceed with the final disbursement this week. I didn't celebrate, not outwardly. But when I hung up, I sat in my car for a long time just breathing. That was the first real victory, not just for me, but against them. But I wasn't done. Once the funds were released, I made a few quiet moves. I opened a new holding company under a different name, Laro Group. No ties to the Lawson family, no familiar executives. I transferred assets, patents, and rights connected to my upcoming projects there. It was airtight, legal, and invisible. Then I started my next venture. I called it NetRack, an AI platform that automated back-end infrastructure for startups. It was exactly what I wished I'd had when I was building Circuit. Within 3 months, early investors were lining up. Within 6, it was already valued at $10 million privately. I made sure no public filings mentioned my last name. While I was rebuilding, Jason was busy imploding. His guidance narrative was losing traction. Without my silence to fuel it, the press started digging. A few journalists noticed discrepancies in his story, conflicting timelines, self-contradicting claims. Then one outlet published a piece highlighting possible misconduct within Lawson and Financial's PR outreach related to my defamation. I didn't even have to do anything. Their own arrogance was eating them alive. Still, I wanted more than vindication. I wanted distance. So I moved, sold my apartment, and bought a penthouse downtown under Laro Group, floor-to-ceiling windows. 2. Minimalist furniture silence that felt earned, not empty. I poured myself into NetRack, working late nights, refining systems, mentoring new developers. I found purpose again, not in proving anyone wrong, but in building something that wasn't tainted by their shadow. And yet, as my success grew, so did their desperation. Mom started leaving voicemails. First gentle, then pleading. "Craig, please call your father. He's worried about you, worried about me." The irony made me laugh. Then Jason texted me out of nowhere. "We should talk. Things are getting messy here." I ignored it. 2 days later, I got an email from one of Dad's old business rivals, a man named Leonard Price. He congratulated me on NodeTrack and attached a short note. "I've heard what your family tried to do. If you ever need leverage, let's just say I have a few old skeletons from your father's closet that might interest you." I didn't respond to that either, but I saved the email. Not because I wanted revenge. Not yet, but because it was proof that the tide had turned. For the first time, people weren't looking at me as the disappointment. They were looking at me as the wild card, the one who broke free. I even started getting invitations, tech conferences, speaking events, interviews. I declined most, but eventually I said yes to one, a private leadership summit hosted at the same country club where my family's Thanksgiving dinner had taken place. The irony was poetic. When I walked into that room months later, I wasn't the outcast with the wrinkled blazer. I was the keynote speaker. They introduced me as Craig Lawson, founder of Circuit and CEO of NodeTrack. I didn't correct them about the last name, not yet. The speech went perfectly. I talked about resilience, innovation, and what it means to build something when no one believes in you. But halfway through, I caught movement near the back, a familiar face. Jason standing by the door, arms folded, pretending to be casual. Our eyes met for a second. He smiled, that same fake, confident smile I'd grown up with. But there was something different this time. It wasn't arrogance, it was discomfort. After the speech, he cornered me near the bar. "Didn't know you'd be here," he said, trying to sound light. "Guess you didn't check the guest list." He laughed awkwardly. "You've been busy. No tracks all over the news. Impressive stuff." I didn't reply. He shifted, his tone softening. "Look, things at Dad's firm. They're not great. He's under investigation. Some client losses, a few bad trades. He's not handling it well." I sipped my drink. "That's unfortunate." Jason's jaw tightened. "Come on, man. You don't have to act like this. We're family, are we?" He exhaled, frustrated. "You can't seriously hold a grudge forever. You won. Isn't that enough?" I looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You still think this was about winning?" He didn't answer. That night, I drove home in silence, city lights streaking past the windshield. I should have felt satisfied, vindicated even. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. They hadn't learned anything, they hadn't apologized, they hadn't even acknowledged what they did. Still, life was finally stable. NetTrack was booming, my reputation restored, and the acquisition funds safely under my control. The same people who once ignored me now wanted a partner with me. My name was quietly building weight in circles my father could never reach. And yet there was still a part of me, that quiet, buried part, that wanted closure. Not revenge, just truth laid bare. That chance came a month later when I received a call from a journalist who'd been investigating Lawson Financial for months. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "you might want to see something before it goes public." She sent me a file, dozens of internal documents, recordings, emails. It was everything. Illegal transfers, fake partnerships, manipulation of client funds, all of it pointing to my father's firm and Jason's involvement. I scrolled through the evidence, my heart pounding. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just holding proof of their betrayal. I was holding power, and I knew exactly how to use it. But before I did, I wanted to see just how far they'd fall on their own. So I waited silently as the walls began to close in on the Lawson empire. It started with whispers, then audits, then finally something that even my father couldn't buy his way out of a federal investigation. When the investigation into Lawson Financial became public, I didn't have to lift a finger. News outlets that once ignored me were now plastering headlines across every feed. Loss and Financial under federal scrutiny for fraudulent activity. It was almost poetic. The same machine that had once chewed up my name was now turning on my father's empire. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. I'd learned to wait to let people show how desperate they could get before the final push. Within a week, Jason called me. I let it ring twice before answering. Craig, his voice cracked slightly. You've seen the news? I have. He exhaled shakily. They're saying I doctor documents. That we falsified financials. You know that's not true. Oh, I do, I said calmly. I know exactly who falsified documents. There was silence, then a nervous laugh. Okay, look, I made mistakes, but I didn't do that. It was Dad's idea. He said we had to protect the family name. I was just following orders. Jason always reverted to that. The obedient son defense convenient when things got messy. I can't help you. I said you made your choices. Craig, please, he said, desperation bleeding into his tone. They're coming for me now. I need you to talk to your contacts, the tech press, the auditors. Tell them I had nothing to do with it. I stared out my window. City lights glinting like cold stars against the skyline. You didn't have a problem using my name when it suited you, I said quietly. Now you want me to clean yours? Come on, man. You're not really going to just watch me go down. I'm not watching, I said. I'm remembering. I hung up, but I wasn't done. His panic gave me something I'd been waiting for. Timing. If Jason was breaking, that meant Dad was cornered. And when men like my father feel cornered, they start making sloppy moves. Through Tomas, I learned the investigation had traced one of the shell company accounts to an offshore fund in Dad's name, the same one he'd used years ago to hide money during a market scandal. That account Tomas discovered was still active. Worse, it had recent transactions, including payments to the consultant who forged my documents. It was the missing piece. I met Tomas in a dim cafe that night. He slid a flash drive across the table. Everything you need. Transaction history, transfer records, timestamps. They tried to erase them, but I found backups. I picked it up carefully. This could ruin him. Tomas smirked. That's the point, right? But I didn't want just ruin. I wanted revelation. A moment they couldn't talk their way out of, where every mask fell off in front of witnesses who mattered. And Thanksgiving was coming again. Mom sent the usual group message. Family dinner, same place, 6 p.m. Let's put the past behind us. I almost deleted it. Then I realized it was the perfect stage. When the night came, I arrived early. Same country club, same polished silverware, same warm lighting. The last time I'd walked in here, I was the disappointment. This time, I was the storm they didn't see coming. They arrived one by one. Mom first dressed like she was attending a photo shoot. Then Jason pale and tense. And finally, Dad looking worn down, though still trying to project authority. He greeted me with forced warmth. Craig, glad you came. I nodded. Wouldn't miss it. We made small talk. It was brittle. Every word felt like it might shatter. Halfway through dinner, Jason finally snapped. Are you happy now? He asked, voice tight. You got what you wanted. The company's collapsing. Dad's reputation is shot. My career's done. I set my fork down. You did that yourselves. Dad's tone sharpened. Don't take that tone with your brother. He's paid enough for your grudge. My grudge, I said softly. You framed me. You stole from me. You tried to bury me. And now you want pity. He leaned forward, eyes cold. You're still bitter. You think success makes you righteous? You wouldn't even have that success if it weren't for this family. I smiled slightly. Funny. I used to believe that too. Then I pulled out my phone, opened a file, and slid it across the table. It was Tomas's compilation, time-stamped bank records, emails, offshore transfers, everything. Dad's expression froze. Jason leaned in and went white. Mom just whispered, What is this? Proof, I said simply. Every transfer, every forgery, every payment tied to your consultant. It's all there. You didn't just break the law. You tried to drag my name through it too. Dad's hand trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it by folding his napkin. You think this will help you? You're as much a Lawson as we are. If this comes out, your name's in it too. I leaned back. No, Craig Lawson is done. Everything I own now, my company, my assets, they're under Lero Group. Clean, independent, untouchable. You taught me to cover my tracks. I just learned better. Jason looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. You planned this, he whispered. For a while, I said, you wanted control. You wanted the family name to mean something again. Well, now it will. Dad glared at me, fury barely contained. You wouldn't dare expose your own father. I looked him dead in the eye. You stopped being my father when you tried to destroy me. For a long time, no one said anything. The only sound was the soft hum of the dining room and the distant clink of glass. Then I stood. You should probably call your lawyer, I said. Because tomorrow morning, this goes to the investigators. All of it. Mom grabbed my arm. Craig, please don't do this. You'll ruin us. I paused. You ruined me first. Then I walked out. The next morning, I didn't send the file. Not to the authorities. Not yet. I sent it to the journalist who'd contacted me months earlier. She'd been waiting for a follow-up, and I gave her everything. Within 48 hours, the story broke. New evidence links Lawson Financial to international fraud ring. Sources suggest internal whistleblower. The photos were everywhere. Dad leaving his office surrounded by reporters, Jason shielding his face from cameras, Mom looking lost in the background. By the end of the week, federal agents raided Lawson Financial's headquarters. Accounts were frozen, assets seized. Jason was named as a cooperating witness, which told me he turned on Dad the second things got bad. Typical. I didn't make any public statement. I didn't need to. The truth spoke louder than I ever could. But the best part came later that month when the same news channel that had once broadcast my company's acquisition now ran a special segment on the fall of Lawson Financial. The reporter ended with a line that almost made me laugh. Ironically, the family's arranged son tech entrepreneur Craig Lawson appears to be the only member who emerged unscathed and more successful than ever. I turned off the TV, sat back in silence, and let that sentence settle. They'd spent years calling me the disappointment. Now I was the only thing left standing with the loss in name, and the world finally knew why. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't done yet. Because I just received a letter, not from a lawyer, not from a journalist, but from someone I hadn't expected to hear from again. A letter that would change what I planned to do next. The letter came on a gray December morning, slipped under my apartment door without a return address. The envelope was plain, the handwriting careful but trembling. I recognized it immediately, my mother's. For a moment, I thought about throwing it away, but curiosity won. Inside was a single page. Her words were short, uneven. Craig, your father's been charged. They came to the house last night. Jason gave them everything to save himself. He's under investigation, too. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that we never stopped loving you. We just didn't understand you. And now it's too late. I hope you find peace. Please don't come here. It's better if you remember us the way we were before all of this. Love, Mom. I set the letter down and stared at it for a long time. There was no satisfaction in it. Not the kind you see in movies. Just quiet, heavy, final quiet. A few days later, the verdicts began rolling in. My father's empire collapsed publicly and painfully. He was found guilty of fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. The same financial press that had once ripped him now picked apart every lie he'd built. Reporters described how he'd used his firm to manipulate markets and cover illegal transfers, and how the cover-up began when he tried to protect his family's image. Jason wasn't spared either. He struck a deal to avoid prison, but his career was finished. Every major financial institution cut ties with him. He moved out of his downtown condo, his name scrubbed from company registries. His once lavish life reduced to a series of apologies no one cared to hear. Mom disappeared from the public eye. She sold the family home quietly and moved out of state. I didn't hear from her again, though sometimes I caught myself wondering if she'd ever found peace. As for me, the irony was I didn't have to lift a single finger once the truth came out. Everything they'd used against me became their undoing. The documents they forged, the lies they spread, the arrogance that made them believe they could control everything. It all came back around perfectly, almost poetically. The night my father's sentencing aired on the news, I sat alone in my office, the city glowing beneath the window. The reporter's voice droned softly in the background. Former financial executive Harold Lawson sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His son, Jason Lawson, has entered a plea agreement and is cooperating with investigators. I muted the TV. For the first time in my life, there was no anger left. No noise, just clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stopped needing approval from the people who never wanted you to succeed. I walked to the window and looked out over the skyline, the same city where they'd once laughed at me, where I'd been the family disappointment. Down below, the headquarters of my company glowed with the logo I'd built from scratch. No track. My name wasn't even on the building, and I liked it that way because I didn't need anyone to know who I was anymore. The people who mattered already did. A few weeks later, I visited the country club one last time. Not for dinner, not for nostalgia, just to see it in daylight. The place was almost empty, the same room where Jason once raised a glass and said, "Maybe someday you'll catch up." I sat at the same table, ordered a drink, and smiled to myself. The waiter asked if I was waiting for someone. No, I said, just remembering something. I stayed for a while, then left the check on the table with a note scribbled on the back. Nothing poetic, nothing cruel, just one line. Guess I finally caught up. And as I walked out into the winter air, I realized something I never had before. Revenge wasn't about watching them fall. It was about finally standing tall without needing them to see it. That was the real victory. That was the end of being the disappointment.